Alright, this is the third example in the practice, so let's go through this. So at first, when you see secant, remember you want to think cosine, so we're going to graph 2 cosine of a half x minus 1 first, and then we'll work our magic and make it into secant. So for the period, we're going to do 2 pi divided by the b value. Okay, so 2 pi over 1 divided by a half, in this case. Whoops, there we go. This is going to give us a 4 pi on top, a 1 on the bottom. So our period is simply 4 pi. Alright, that makes it easy to see what the tick marks are, because if 1, 2, 3, if the fourth tick mark is 4 pi, that means that every tick mark is worth 1 pi. So that's nice. Vertical displacement, we have this minus 1, so our graph's going to get shifted down 1. Let's take care of that right now. Draw in a horizontal line at -1. Okay. And then reflection, don't see a negative here, don't see a negative here, there's no reflection. And if you haven't picked up on this yet, we're not doing phase shifts with secant and cosecant. There's enough to do. Alright, now we do need to talk about the fact that this graph has an amplitude of 2. So when we go to graph it, we need to just be careful about making sure our waves go up 2 and down 2 from the midline. But I say we're ready to graph. Alright, so now we have our new midline. So again, you're going to pretend like this is your x-axis, and this is cosine. So cosine starts at its high point. So from the midline, count up 2 to account for that amplitude of 2. So it's at its high point, and then it's at the midline. And then cosine is going to be at its low point, so count down 2 from the midline. And then it's going to be back up at the middle, and then up to, so it should look like that. Okay. I'm going to continue that pattern, and then I think it's good practice to check that in your calculator now, because you're going to not like it if you draw in your asymptotes with the highlighter, only to come find out later that they're in the wrong spot, and you can't erase your highlighter. So I've been there. It's not fun. So let's see here. If this is 4 pi, this would be 8 pi. And we already talked about how each tick mark is just pi, which means all the way back here would be -8 pi. Alright, so I'm going to go to my calculator. And I'm going to type not this one, but this one. So 2 cosine of a half x minus 1. And then it's down at -1. So I'm going to hit -1. I'm going to pull this closer so it's easier to see. Okay. Alright, and then I'm going to go to window. And I definitely need to change that. Make it from -8 pi. And I need an 8 first. To a +8 pi. With the scale being just pi. And then your y max and min is okay. Alright, so now if I graph it. Sorry. Okay. Alright, see how that midline's super important? Because if you didn't, let me focus on this. Okay. So this midline is telling you to draw your asymptotes like here, and here, and here, for example. You have to treat this like your new x-axis, because you're not going to draw asymptotes where this graph's hitting the x-axis. Now if you did, you would see that your asymptotes wouldn't be evenly spaced from one another, and that's not correct. So your asymptotes should always be at equal intervals or equal spacing from one another. But this looks like we graphed it right. I know we can't really focus on both of them at the same time. But see how on the y-axis it's up at +1? That first tick mark is hitting the midline. That second tick mark, it's down at its lowest point, down at -3, and then back to the middle, and then at that fourth tick mark, it's at its highest point. So I think that's good enough to check. Now let me see if I'll refocus this, because it looks bad. Okay, so now we're good to draw in our asymptotes. So, oopsies, oh, that highlighter was open and I just drew all over myself. Okay, So again, I'm drawing these in where it's hitting the midline. Oops, that was a bad one. Okay. Alright, and then any up dot's going to get an up curve, and any down dot. Okay, so notice I'm tracing over that dot that was already there because they do share that point in common. So I do that to make sure that my graph goes through that point, even if my curves kind of look not super great. It's fine. Alright, so your domain is going to be all real numbers, except x cannot equal whatever that first asymptote is times n, where n is an blank integer. Doesn't look like the word is. Okay, that's a little better. Sorry, that's still really sloppy. I apologize. I'll do better on the next one. Okay, so let's see here. Our asymptotes, our first one is at pi. Right, so that's going to be that first blank. So pi times n, where n is, let's see here. This is 1 pi, 2 pi. This one here would be 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi. These ones I think are easier to see. See how it goes 1, 3, 5, 7. Those are all of your odd integers. So you'd put where n is an odd integer. And then your range is going to go from negative infinity to negative 3 with the u, and then from positive 1 to infinity. And that's that.